Picked your story? Picked your protagonist and your antagonist? Know the secrets and desires and dilemmas of both? Picked your genre and your tagline? When we've built these blocks of the story, we can start sketching our ideas into scenes. No, not drawing it. We're writing, you know. And today we build more of the foundation for our story. Welcome to The Right Focus. We cover productivity, process, craft, and tools. Our podcast episodes last as long as it takes to fix a quick dinner, drive a short commute, or take a brisk walk. All through the summer months, we focus on the craft of writing novels and novellas and epics, from beginning ideas to prepping for publication, week by week by week. In this episode, we look at how to create a story sketch. A story sketch catches the basic outlines for our first vision of story. Last week, we dug out the story that we want to write. This week, we pour the groundwork for our novels. Unlike the concrete block foundation for a house, however, any structural details that we add this week can always be changed. The best sketches are quickly written, casting the major concepts for the novel, just as an artist will sketch the preliminary elements of a canvas. A sketch should never be detailed and convoluted. When we become detailed, we become wedded to specific elements and are reluctant to change them. As story flows out of us in the organic drafting process, we can and should expect early elements to morph. These elements will be fleshed out. They might be transposed with others. They might even be dropped completely. We won't know what will happen. In the midst of writing, with the creative muse bouncing on our shoulders, we will expand upon, flip around, and delete elements. The muse will guide us and drive us, as it sometimes seems, in certain story directions. New characters may appear, setting may change, unforeseen conflicts may arise. If we were bound lockstep to specific things happening at specific times in specific ways, we would not want to abandon those steps. We would try to force the story up the steps where we want it to go. Should we do that, however, our muse will lose her bounciness. If we prevent the story flow too much, the muse becomes dammed. Story stagnates. We can't see our next steps for the slimy growth caused by an outline we're determined to follow. By letting the story flow, ideas cascading onto the page, we keep the river undammed and the novel progressing. Remember this while working through these foundation tasks. Remember this when drafting. First, sketch our protagonist introduction. Last week we built the primary characters. This week we want to reveal them through events. In looking at strengths and purposes, desires, and the 3 H's, how can we show one of these aspects through the action of our protagonist? To see heroism or humility displayed is much more effective than a sermon telling us. Tell is, John has a soft heart for dogs. Show is, the muddy puppy wriggled with excitement when John knelt before her. He lifted her with one hand, then tucked her against his chest. Wet paws stained his white shirt, but he touched his nose to the pup's when she lifted her head. Her tail beat a steady drum against his ribs. Once we have the element we want to show, determine the setting. Where is the protagonist? When? Time of day or night, season, year? What does our protagonist see, hear, feel, taste? What is the climate? How does our protagonist feel about this setting? What brought him or her here? An event? A person? What is the danger our protagonist will face in this scene? This is the opening of our novel. We should present our primary character's normal existence, then build the event that starts the conflict for the entire book, whether that event is directly related to the conflict or merely tangential, like a spark drifting away from a campfire. James Scott Bell says that at crucial moments, all protagonists face a death of some type: physical, their own or someone dear to them; personal, of a relationship or a job that gives purpose; or psychological, of a long-held dream or hope. Which type of death will our protagonist face in this opening scene? Physical, personal, or psychological? In medias res, which is a Latin term meaning in the middle of things, we have a time-honored way of starting a novel. Rather than completely showing a character in his existence who only gradually becomes aware of a conflict, starting in medias res quickly presents the character in danger. His responses to that danger exhibit massive amounts of information to the reader. In our example above, immediately after John picks up the puppy, something must happen to place him, or the puppy, or the people around them both, in danger of some sort. Is a note attached to the puppy's collar, a note intercepted because the puppy came to John instead of someone else? Does the puppy offer an opportunity for John to meet someone who will change the focus and direction of his life? Is it not mud, but blood, that covers the puppy's paws? Our choice for the danger depends on the genre and subgenre of the story we are writing. Second, sketch our antagonist introduction. Bring our antagonist into the opening scene with our protagonist. While the protagonist is the primary character facing the conflict, the antagonist is the conflict creator. My apologies for the sound of mowing. It's summer. The grass is growing. My neighbor is mowing. He mowed Sunday, and now it's Wednesday, and he's mowing again. Ah, well, where was I with notes? In Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, the protagonist for Brutus is his ideal of the Roman Republic, an ideal that has him falling for Cassius's manipulative comments that Caesar wants to become an emperor. In Great Gatsby, Daisy Buchanan represents the corrupt social rank that Nick Carraway had lusted after before he saw beneath the beautiful frothy plaster to the blood-colored flooring underneath, hinted at in Fitzgerald's description of the Buchanan's home, less than 10 pages into the paperback. Many novels often open with the antagonist, displaying his villainy. Only then is the protagonist introduced. Many novels only hint at the antagonist. The conflict that begins rolling seems more elemental, like a force of nature, rather than specific to a purpose. Many novels present an evil that seems to be the antagonist, while the conflict creator is actually within the protagonist, like Cassius seems to be the antagonist in Julius Caesar, but the conflict is within Brutus. Some novels give no hint of their direction except through symbolic imagery, like the heavily plastered ceiling and claret-colored rug of the Buchanan's drawing room in The Great Gatsby. As we draft our novels, our antagonist may morph, becoming more like Brutus's internal ideal, or a social rank that seems like an institution that is so ingrained. Or we may decide to fix upon an institution, only to have a representative of it become the true antagonist. Remember, we are sketching ideas. A draft will solidify those ideas. Looking at our work on the first day of the week, looking at our work for the protagonist, we can discover how our antagonist will come on stage in the same way. Is the antagonist drawn or lured into the scene? Was the protagonist drawn or lured or impelled by an event or required by circumstance to become involved? Well, that's the same question to ask the antagonist. Will the reader know immediately which character is the antagonist? Or will we only hint at the truth? Will we drop hints later for the revelation at the dark moment of the story or in the climactic scene? Next, we sketch our setting. Readers need to be grounded. They need to envision the specifics of setting. The writer's job is to present place and time and culture. While we want the major elements of setting to remain fluid, we can become detailed with the setting of this introductory scene. Details add depth and richness to our writing. When we describe, we need to be specific. Don't just say house. Describe the kind of house, the color of the siding, the color of the roof, the kind of yard, the front door, how many windows. If we have a house with brown brick rather than red, let the readers see the brown. What would the characters hear? What creates the sounds? What is the distance of those sounds from the characters? On a busy street, we have a cacophony of sounds. In a suburb, we also still have multiple sounds, from vehicles on distant roads, birds chirping, to dogs barking in a neighbor's house, to a neighbor mowing the lawn. again. What would characters feel? The cold from air conditioning? The wind cooling their skin on a hot summer day? The stickiness of the tape used for binding wounds? Can what the characters feel be related to their jobs or their purpose? How can smell be a factor? Noxious and penetrating smells are easy to describe, but sweet smells can create a juxtaposition with the danger occurring. We need to ground our readers by writing about 350 words to describe the setting. Determine the best place in the work where we can seed this information in for the protagonist and the antagonist to relate. We sketch our background next. Background is essential to the writer. Readers may never see it, though. Most of the background and the research that we do for any story will never be displayed to our audience. It informs us as we write the novel. You have to know some of the background before we begin the draft. Consider as background the details of our characters and our places in our book. Research is factual information about the real world. Whatever we do, don't info dump. The best definition of info dump is information regurgitated onto the novel's page without necessity for character or scene or event. For example, in an alien invasion science fiction novel, 300 words describing the development of the first space probe that left our solar system, which lured the aliens here, would be straight info dump. Use that information sparingly, if at all. Researched information should be seeded in, snippets at a time. Why not have a character named for the man whose greeting to space occurred on the Voyager 1 program that developed the probe that eventually lured the aliens here? As the man works on a solution to fight the aliens, someone can point out, "Hey, you're Kurt Waldheim. Isn't that the name of the man who recorded the greeting to aliens for the Voyager 1 probe?" John D. MacDonald included a lot of factual research about sailing in his novels, especially the Travis McGee books. The information pops onto the page in snippets rather than in whole spates of info dump. When we draft, we discover that we need more research or background. That's okay. We can choose to pursue this information at that time and break the flow of the writing, or merely make a sticky note and wait for revision. During revision, we may discover additional information is needed. In this age of computers, it is simple to add information into previous locations of a document. The background that we need at this very moment is how did the introductory situation develop, and we need to know its origin up to the entrance of our primary characters. Finally, for this week's work on our novel, we need to sketch our direction. Before we call the writing for a day finished, we need to know where the story is heading. Every time we finish a scene, especially if we're a puzzler jumping around to write different scenes, we need to jot down our ideas for the event that will develop next. We know how an opening situation developed. We know the basics of our two primaries. Ideas should be percolating for the next scenes in the book. A jot list for our next direction will provide not only details about the upcoming scene, but also the reason for those details. If we plan to write the very next day, or later in the afternoon or the evening, something may happen to disrupt our plans and throw those ideas out of our minds. That's when a jot list becomes essential. By reviewing a jot list also, it's as if our brain starts back at working and we can get into writing the next time so much easier. We can always abandon our ideas, or we can save them for later scenes. Beginning writers especially plan a next scene and then realize the subconscious has worked on our problems while we sleep. They may rewind several scenes or jump ahead to a later scene or become involved in those later scenes. Anything can happen to delay our return to this point of the book, including life roles. So, here's what to include in our jot list. Remember, this is a sketch, broad outlines only. And if you happen to think of great dialogue, use a sticky note, which is an essential writer's tool. How will the opening situation resolve? Is the protagonist and or the antagonist involved in that resolution? Who helped the situation develop? Who helped it? Did the situation morph beyond its expected development? Who else entered the scene? Were they a hindrance or a help? Which characters have entered the story but really did nothing? What will happen next? And by the way, if you bring in a puppy, make sure that you know what's going to happen to the puppy later in the book. At this point, I like to print everything out. I'm a tactile visual person who likes goal completion. Having something visible in my hands is a much better incentive for a long-term goal like novel publication. Having manuscript pages and background notes out on my desk is a constant reminder of a task I wish to complete. And we need to organize our files, our electronic files as well as our physical ones. If you've not yet done so, in File Explorer, which is the gathering place of a computer file, create a specific folder for this manuscript. Name it a short version of the title. Everything will slide into this file. All generated documents from story development to character documents to research and background. Don't put everything into one single document. Break it out into separate documents. Have a novel file, separate research files, character development and background files, also separate. Later, we'll add our converted publishing files and cover images. Creating the single folder enables an easy search for materials months and years from now. Years? Yes, years. We're in this for the long haul, right? In a handful of years, we might decide to turn this single book into a series. Coming up, we set in stone certain scenes for our novel. We're etching in stone as we finalize the novel we're going to write. By the way, we can always write down ideas for other stories. We don't have to be focused on only one. After all, we're writers. Ideas just pour out. Inspiration for this week comes from Kit Reed. Beginning to write, we discover what we have to write about. Thanks for listening to The Right Focus, a podcast for writers at all levels, hosted by M.A. Lee with the assistance of Remy Black and Edie Runes from Writers Inc. Books. All through the summer months, our focus is the craft of writing. We are discovering your novel from beginning idea to prepping for publication. We'll work through the process stages of foundations to story, envisioning the story, analyzing story before, during, and after the draft, harvesting the story through revisions and enhancements, and prepping the story for publication. Many of these preps and guides are useful setups for the National Novel Writing Month in November. That's writing only, no idea work. We can also use this information to solve issues with stories that we've abandoned. All those stories are crying in the wilderness. Time to rescue them with the right focus. Show notes for this and other episodes can be found at therightfocus.blogspot.com. Write to us at winkbooks@aol.com. Remember, whatever occurs, write on. Picked your story? Picked your protagonist and your antagonist? Know the secrets and desires and dilemmas of both? Picked your genre and your tagline? When we've built these blocks of the story, we can start sketching our ideas into scenes. No, not drawing it. We're writing, And today we build more of the foundation for our story. Welcome to The Right Focus. We cover productivity, process, craft, and tools. Our podcast episodes last as long as it takes to fix a quick dinner, drive a short commute, or take a brisk walk. All through the summer months, we focus on the craft of writing novels and novellas and epics, from beginning ideas to prepping for publication, week by week by week. In this episode, we look at how to create a story sketch. A story sketch catches the basic outlines for our first vision of story. Last week, we dug out the story that